at that time we had a lot of debate about the European social model, which was thought to be something much better than the American society. That in Europe we actually take care of people, or rather governments take care of people from the cradle to the grave, but in the United States, for instance, that people are left on their own. Of course, this is a simplification because the United States have many government social programs as well, and there are countries in Europe which are quite free, but this was portrayed as the difference. And I tried to show that, as a matter of fact, the traditional European social model was very harmful for social values, because well-meaning regulations in the labor market tend to produce unemployment, particularly for young and immigrants. And we can see the social consequence of that. Riots in Paris and other places. That was the consequence of well-meaning social government interventions. And this is just one example. Another example might be if governments takes over healthcare and a government monopoly should deliver healthcare to people. You can see that you will have waiting lists. People with cancer standing and waiting to get healthcare, to get treatment for their serious disease, and dying waiting for treatment because the government monopoly cannot deliver, because monopolies usually cannot deliver anything on time. Two examples of social policies, of the social model, that are very anti-social, if you ask me. So that's what I wrote in the book, that this is a very anti-social model, and the alternative should be to reform, again, in a free market direction, increasing economic freedom. Also in areas like welfare services, like healthcare, also in areas like labor markets, because that is actually more social. It is not very social if governments try to do it, because governments don't do it well. It is much more social if people can be allowed to keep more of their money and make the decisions by themselves, which kinds of welfare services and other social insurance they want to purchase. There are several reasons why some countries are more hit than others by the financial and economic crisis. One reason is for sure that they have a large part of their economy which is foreign trade, which is normally something which is very beneficial because that creates a dynamic economy. But if you have an economy dependent on foreign trade like Sweden's, you will have, and you have a global demand which is dipping, you know, it's falling, you will see that, okay, the world is not demanding our products to the same extent. And that is why, of course, that's one reason. Another reason is if you have a big financial sector, like the UK or like the US, or like, for instance, Iceland, you will see that if you have a big financial crisis, that will have bigger effects on the rest of the economy. But we cannot see that, in general, free market reforms have not made countries more prone to have a serious recession. On the contrary, actually, we have seen that countries that have a high degree of economic freedom have actually been able to bounce back very quickly from a crisis. Also because there's more freedom for entrepreneurs to quickly shift the resources into new and productive sectors in the society, whereas in a more government-controlled, central planned society, that process is much slower. We can also see, which has to be added, that the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, or in the Baltic states, which are very hit by the financial crisis, you've actually had an increase in income of more than 100% during the past 15, 20 years. 100% income increase. That's twice as high income now, thanks to the free market reforms that they did. What happens now? Well, some of them have a decrease in the economy by 10% or something. 90% of the increase is still there. And soon we will be turning again for another 100% increase. So again, this is a serious crisis. It was very bad that the American government created it. But it is not damaging the foundations or taking away the prosperity increase that we have had in the past 20 years. The state has to exist, unless you're an anarchist and think you shouldn't have a state. But I'm definitely not an anarchist, and I think the state has a very important role in not least keeping up law and order and having functioning institutions and having an education system so that you can actually give an opportunity to everyone in the country. So there are roles for governments, and which also have definitely an economic effect. These roles, the way the institutions function, also the informal institutions like property rights and that kind of, and the freedom to make deals, etc. Those are institutions that are very important for economic development. But when you talk about the kind of state-led economic development, there is a myth that in some Asian countries, governments have actually been able to somehow spur this development. Well, what we've seen is that this development has started in a country where government has had a central role, but then government has rolled back. And that is when it has actually really started. Because take South Korea, for example, which is a country which was in 1950, same level of prosperity as its northern neighbor. Today, the Southern Korean is 20 times wealthier. And what is the reason for that? Well, the South Korean is quite a lot freer to start a business or to trade or to attract investments. That is the kind of freedoms we need. But of course, South Korea has a government with functioning institutions. But the government is doing what the government should be doing. The government is not running companies or regulating markets in a harmful way. Very much so. We will have a very much brighter future than anyone can expect, because we can't predict. We can't predict exactly the products and the societies of tomorrow. We can only see that it has constantly become much better than we have expected.